This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. It's Politics Monday, and today we ask the question, has there ever been a week in politics like the one we just finished?
The wait is over. Iowa Democrats head to caucuses in the first contest of this presidential election year.
Yeah, we're obviously waiting on results still. People don't really know what's going on.
You've been on hold for 2 hours trying to report the results from your one precinct?
Yes.
We are going to start the count over.
Madam Speaker, the President of the United States.
Speaker Pelosi attempted to shake the president's hand, but he turned. Not clear if he didn't notice or chose not to shake the hand.
A stunning moment here at the end of the president's speech. Nancy Pelosi tearing up what appeared to be a copy.
It was one of the most partisan rooms that the president has addressed. We even saw some Democratic lawmakers walk out of the State of the Union, something I had not seen before.
Senators, how say you? Is the respondent, Donald John Trump, guilty or not guilty?
Mr. Romney. Guilty. Mr. Romney, guilty.
Said Donald John Trump be, and he is hereby acquitted of the charges in.
It was all bullshit. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens.
From the tone of that speech in the East Room of the White House, this is just the beginning of a wild campaign season. I'd say Bachman-Turner overdrive lyrics seem prophetic. You ain't seen nothing yet. Here to help us catch our breath after the past week and put it into perspective, and good luck with that, is Dr. Eric Heberlig, professor of political science and public administration at UNC Charlotte. Welcome back.
Thanks, Mike.
He is in our Spirit Square studio, and comfortably ensconced somewhere near Catawba College is Dr. Michael Bitzer, chair of the Department of Politics there and the author of the Old North State blog. He joins us via Skype. Welcome back.
Good to be with you.
And joining us by phone is Dr. Whitney Ross-Monzo, assistant professor of political science at Meredith College in Raleigh, where she is also the assistant director of the Meredith Poll. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
As we go through the conversation, you can email us at Charlotte Talks if you'd like to join us. Email us at charlottetalks@wfae.org. Search for WFAE on Facebook. Get to us through Twitter at Charlotte Talks. So let me go through very quickly, all three of you. I want to get a response from all three of you. Have we as Americans ever witnessed anything like what we went through last week? Dr. Heberlig.
No, but every week before that it was pretty similar.
Dr. Monzo.
I'm almost afraid to answer this question because I'm afraid to see what Washington will manage to come up with this week. So for fear of putting bad juju in the air, I would say, no, it's totally normal.
Okay, and Michael Bitzer.
I join my distinguished colleagues.
So, Eric, I suppose
it's unreal.
I suppose, Eric, that we could take these events chronologically, and I think we will. So let's begin in Iowa. By its own state law, Iowa must have the first caucus of the year among all the caucus states, of which there are a dwindling few. The Democratic Party has been working hard to eliminate caucuses. Will this be, what happened in Iowa, be what will make that happen?
Iowa has been very tenacious over the years in maintaining its first-in-the-nation status, but this was a big hit for them. I mean, they're already facing lots of pressure in an increasingly diversifying Democratic Party to justify why a small, very white state leads and is the agenda setter for the rest of the party. So I think their time is pretty limited.
But it's not just the fact that Iowa is so undiversified. It's also because they stuck to this caucus thing. I think there are 4 or 5 states that still have caucuses. Nevada, which is upcoming, has one as well. And the Democratic Party really doesn't want these anymore because they're time-consuming. It limits the participation. Are they going to get their way now that they've had this really awful, to use the president's word, kerfuffle? Covfefe, that's what he used.
I think that the pressure is on to, I don't think Iowa is going to go away from the caucuses, but certainly participation in caucuses is so much lower than in primaries because it's just so time-consuming for people who are only marginally interested in politics to basically give up an entire evening to talk just about politics rather than just show up, vote and get out of there in 5 minutes as primary states like North Carolina do.
Right. So these caucuses were on Monday night, if we all recall. That seems like eons ago now, but usually the results are available before the night is out. No results were available on Monday. We had to wait for most of the week. And as a matter of fact, I looked on Saturday, and they were still only reporting 99% of the results. Today in the newspaper, I think they're reporting that Pete Buttigieg has in fact won this. So I'm assuming that 99.9% of the results are in. I know that the speed of the release of the results, Dr. Manzo, is important to the media. It's probably important to people in Iowa. It's important to the candidates in their campaigns. But do we put too much emphasis on the speed? Does it matter as long as eventually we know who won?
Well, I think it's really telling that the AP has still refused to call a winner because it's so close, and the Sanders campaign has asked for recounts in some places, or recanvasses. And, I mean, obviously the most important thing is to get the count right, but I think that the Iowa Democratic Party just made so many blunders in the process. They extended it themselves by not testing the app they were going to use correctly, and then they decided to switch to paper halfway through, but they weren't prepared for that. And, I mean, I think speed does matter when you have so many primaries coming up. I mean, New Hampshire is tomorrow, and then our own primary, along with many others, is on Super Tuesday. And so candidates need to be able to know how to fix their message or where they need to start focusing their attention. Are they basically dead in the water? And I think if you can't handle releasing accurate results in a timely manner, then you probably don't have a claim on going first much longer.
And I think I know the answer to this question, Dr. Manzo, but just in case, recanvassing is the same as recounting. Is that correct?
I think so. I think that's one of the weird Iowa terms that they use that no other states use.
Okay, so the media has been talking a lot about this snafu, Michael, about how the phone app that the Iowa Democratic Party gave to precinct captains to report results had really not been adequately tested, which sounds bizarre to me. And some volunteers evidently were not properly trained on how to use the app, and a lot of the volunteers are older people, so maybe that's legit. What about the use of a cell phone app at all? I've heard nobody talk about this. We talk all the time about how important it is to make sure that anything that has to do with our elections never touches the internet. Well, it's a cell phone. Of course it touches the internet, and it goes over the cell system. What's up with that? Why did they think that was a good idea? Why is it even legal?
Well, part of it is the fact that the state of Iowa does not conduct the caucuses. The Democratic primary party of Iowa conducts it. And so they are using their own system. They set up the ground rules. The state really doesn't have any say-so necessarily, unlike here in North Carolina with our primary elections. It's run by the states, administered by the counties. So, you know, they are going to have a lot to answer for. The National Party, Tom Perez has already called them out on it. And, you know, we were talking previously about why Iowa goes first. They are the most tenacious in terms of wanting that front runner status, in terms of giving candidates the retail kind of politics on the ground that is ordinary in Iowa. Once you get to a state like North Carolina, it's all over the airwaves. It's all kind of advertising that runs it. But this app situation was a disaster. They didn't have any backup. And the problem was they didn't have enough phone lines to let all the precinct captains call in their results when the apps failed. So, you know, it is on the Iowa Democratic Party that this whole fiasco should be blamed.
Has this shaken people's faith in elections or the elections process? And a better question, I guess, would be, Dr. Manzo, should it shake our confidence in the elections? Or is the Iowa caucus simply so unique and the mistakes that happened there could not and would not be repeated elsewhere?
Well, I don't want to say that mistakes can't be repeated because, I mean, as we have seen, technology fails. But I will say that I don't think that this should or will affect most regular Americans' confidence in elections just because, as you mentioned previously, most Americans are not in a caucus state. They're in a primary state. So this whole thing already feels weird and alien. And then secondly, the amount of Americans then that pay attention to caucus and primary results is much smaller than the people that will turn out for the general election. So we definitely still have reason to be concerned about how this went down, but I think overall Americans should still definitely feel comfortable with how elections are conducted.
Of course, the big conversation for the past, 3 years has been about interference in our elections from foreign actors or bad actors and doing it through the internet and doing it through social media, et cetera. Iowa State Democrats say what happened there is not about hacking. Nobody hacked, and there was no election interference of any kind. Should we believe that? I mean, would they tell us? Really? Would they tell us if there was? Eric.
We know that that's not exactly true. Oh, I'm sorry, Erica.
Go ahead, Whitney.
We know that's not true because we know that on 4chan they posted the phone number where the Democrat precincts were supposed to call in, and they were clogging the lines, trying to make it so that people couldn't call in. So the fact that if they say there wasn't any interference, there was within our own country.
Yeah, and 4chan is a right-wing political location on the internet for people to gather of like minds. And they published that phone number.
Yeah, I think if there was hacking or was interference, what politicians do is shift the blame to other people. The Iowa Democratic Party has taken such a beating. If it's not actually their fault, they would let us know that it's the Russians or the Chinese or Donald Trump's.
Yeah, well, it makes you wonder where the people on 4chan got their phone number. One would think that's an unpublished number. So let's talk about these results. I'm not sure what they are this morning, Michael, but on Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, well, you tell me what they are. You tell me what they are.
Well,
his app tells him.
I'm looking at a web page actually for the Washington Post, and what they are reporting is 100%. Certainly, Bernie Sanders, in terms of the popular vote, came in first, but delegates went to Pete Buttigieg. And that's ultimately the big story is you want to start collecting delegates towards 1991 to get the nomination. Mm-hmm. Now, what's interesting within the vote itself, and I think a lot of people are just looking at individuals, I think we can really look at this Democratic primary field in two distinct ways, a kind of center-left group of candidates and a very left-oriented group of candidates, and they're basically tied. I mean, the first initial vote taken at the Iowa caucuses, the left candidates, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Andrew Yang, got 50% of the vote. The other candidates, Biden, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, got 49.1. After the second round, the reallocated votes, the Biden-Buttigieg group got 51%. Sanders, Warren got 48%. So there's a very clear, it seems, divide within the Democratic primary field that Iowa just basically laid open to the rest of the country. And I think we're still seeing that in New Hampshire and potentially beyond.
We have about 20 seconds left, Michael. Which surprised you more, how well Buttigieg performed in Iowa or how disappointingly Biden did?
Both. It was really surprising that both Buttigieg did well. Biden came in fourth. That's a real danger wake-up call for him.
Okay. We have to take a break. We'll come back with more with Dr. Michael Bitzer from Catawba College, Dr. Eric Heberlig from UNC Charlotte, and Dr. Whitney Manzo from Meredith College at Charlotte Talks. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Corkscrew Wine Shop and Bar, located at The View in Uptown Charlotte, Birkdale Village in Lake Norman, and Kingsley Village Town Center in Fort Mill, with wine and beer from all over the world. Relax, uncork, unwind. CorkscrewWinepub.com. And Southminster, a life plan community located in the heart of South Charlotte. Dining features authentic Southern and international cuisine prepared by a culinary team in a restaurant setting. Info at southminster.org. The rise in the number of homeless children. We'll be looking at that tomorrow on this program. 2018 reports that the number is rising 15%, or has risen 15% in just 3 years, to well over 1.5 million homeless students. The same thing is happening here. In a city flush with development and banking and wealth, homeless camps dot the landscape, and homeless children live with adults in those camps. So we look into why these statistics are on the rise and what's being done to care for homeless young people tomorrow at 9.
How deep is the split within the Democratic Party? After Iowa and the president's impeachment acquittal, the split between progressives and moderates could sink the party in November. Is Democratic desire to beat President Trump strong enough to persuade both camps to unite for the fight ahead? I'm Todd Zwillick. That's next time on 1A.
That conversation coming up at 10 following Charlotte Talks with Mike Collins on 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're here with three political scientists trying to make sense out of last week in American politics. Dr. Eric Heberlig is in our studio from UNC Charlotte. Dr. Michael Bitzer joins us via Skype from Catawba College, and Dr. Whitney Ross-Manzo is with us from Meredith College. Democrats had been preparing last week, Eric, for a big turnout in Iowa. Bernie was promoting it was going to be a turnout of historic proportions, but the early data suggests that it was on pace for only 2016. And according to Politico, Democrats were counting on Barack Obama levels of enthusiasm. They got Hillary Clinton numbers. Did those numbers continue to disappoint Democrats as the week went on and they recanvassed and recounted the vote?
It is a concern for them. Democrats got a surge in voting in the 2018 midterm elections, right. Many of the special elections up to them. So I think they expected a continuation of that, and they would certainly feel much better about their chances of beating Trump if they saw evidence of it. So it's unclear at this point. We have just one case, one vote so far, whether it's they vented their spleen in the 2018 midterm elections,
right?
Or whether the fact that there are 59.8 Democrats running and all of them have some weaknesses, that people at this stage are saying, well, I can't decide, so rather than showing up, I'll stay home and let somebody else decide for me.
Well, Dr. Manzo, you helped run a poll, the Meredith poll. I don't know that you polled on this question, but I would guess that you kind of have an overall feeling, at least in North Carolina, where voters, what their mindset is. Do you think this speaks more to the lack of enthusiasm for Democratic candidates in Iowa, political fatigue, because we live in a Trumpian world where you just can't keep up with politics because it literally changes by the hour? Less anger among Democrats than we thought at Donald Trump? What do you think this indicates?
Well, we actually will be fielding a poll next week where we will be measuring enthusiasm right now among North Carolinians. But in the past, we've actually found pretty good levels of enthusiasm among both Democrats and Republicans in the state to vote in both the 2018 election and the upcoming 2020. I think the problem in Iowa is that it's simply, as we talked about earlier, it's hard to give up your whole evening when you aren't extremely committed to a candidate, and with the divide that Michael was talking about, it can be hard to be decisive at this early stage. And then secondly, the caucus style is just not accessible to many, many people who the Democrats count on to turn out in the general election, like people who take care of children, or members of minority groups, or even people with that don't have a permanent home. Maybe they're moving a lot in urban centers. And so all of those big constituencies within the Democratic Party normally aren't really present in Iowa or can't turn out for a caucus.
Yeah, Michael Sarasso, who worked for Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign, says there is an enthusiasm gap. He says none of these candidates right now are inspiring what they're claiming they're inspiring. Michael, do you agree? Do Democrats have a problem there?
I think so, but I think what is really happening right now is a real battle in terms of where the Democratic Party is going to go. Is it going to continue to kind of be a center-left or are they going to go left as the Republicans over the past numerous election cycles have gone to the right? And so, that raises real questions. And I think for Democratic primary voters, this is the real issue. Do you want to go the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren route, or do you want to go kind of the more moderate, middle of the road, slightly left kind of approach of a Biden or a Buttigieg or a Klobuchar? I think parties do this all the time. They have these internal fights about the direction and the heart and the soul of the party, and where presidential candidates end up are the kind of epitome of this is where the party thinks it wants to go.
So by a narrow margin, Eric, Pete Buttigieg won in Iowa against Bernie Sanders, who has a formidable machine in operation, and he did well, I think, in Iowa 4 years ago. So is this more about where this party wants to go? Or because it seems to me that if Buttigieg can overcome the Bernie Sanders machine, there might be more of a sentiment to be center as opposed to left in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, well, even the entrance polls in Iowa showed that almost 2/3 of the Democratic caucusers had a preference for someone who's electable over someone who they agreed with, which suggests that there's a real opening if any of the candidates, but probably the centrists are better positioned to do this, can make that claim that we can reach out to disaffected Republicans, independents, and wrap this thing up. But the real tension is not just ideological, but it's in terms of how do you win? It's do the Democrats win by appealing to swing voters, centrist people in the suburbs that they did well with in 2018, or do they gin up the base and get non-traditional voters to turn out, which they did have success with in losing efforts in states like Georgia and Florida in 2018.
But Democrats have these two left-of-center candidates, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and they have three centrists. They have Buttigieg, Biden, and Klobuchar. Why? What is it about Buttigieg that gave him the traction that he got? And because Klobuchar's way down, and so is Biden, surprisingly so.
I thought Klobuchar's would do better, given that she's from Minnesota. She's used to running on those type of Midwestern farm-type issues.
Right.
So Buttigieg did a good job strategically of targeting rural voters, voters in counties that had switched from voting for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, and then switched to Trump in 2016. So in a race where he barely won, it's those kind of tactical and strategic choices that probably made the difference for him.
So it's on to Sanders, next door to Sanders' home state. New Hampshire's right next door to Vermont, where he represents that state in the Senate. It's a foregone conclusion, I would think, that he has an edge there, Dr. Manzo. But will the real test then be South Carolina for Bernie Sanders? And would the same be true for Buttigieg?
Yes, absolutely. New Hampshire is probably going to go Sanders. I mean, there's always room for movement, but it is next door to him. And similar to Iowa, New Hampshire isn't as diverse as the rest of the country. So I think Sanders shouldn't be worried about the result there necessarily. But coming to the South, where the electorate is much more diverse and the types of issues that they've been talking about so far are not issues that Southerners care about, I think is going to be a real problem for Sanders. And this is where, and also Buttigieg, I think this is where we might see Biden begin to play more strongly.
Well, he did surprisingly poorly. He said it was a gut punch to his campaign. There have been rumors about trouble in the campaign organization by Joe Biden. But his debate performances have not exactly been scintillating. They've been disappointing. Are either of those to blame, or is something else at work? And Michael, as he moves towards South Carolina, where Joe Biden seems to have significant African-American support, could that turn the tide for him?
Potentially, but we have to remember that there's another state before South Carolina, and that's Nevada. And I think Nevada and South Carolina both represent where the Democratic Party really is headed as a multiracial, very diverse party. In Nevada, it's going to be the Hispanic Latino vote. In South Carolina, it's going to be African American vote. If Biden has a fourth or potentially a fifth place out of New Hampshire, he's going to be limping into Nevada. That caucus state, again, is going to be important because of the Latino vote. And if he can survive to South Carolina, yes, his firewall may help him there. But if he doesn't do well in Nevada, that's 3 losses in a row. His firewall may burn down, and then it's up for anybody because there's nobody that really has that connection to the African American community in South Carolina, like the legacy that Joe Biden has because of the Obama administration.
They say, Dr. Monza, that African American voters are lukewarm to Mayor Pete. At least they were prior to the Iowa caucuses, and they'll play a big role in South Carolina. Is that still the case, or will we have to wait until the South Carolina primary to find out just how lukewarm they are?
Yeah, I think that, part of the reason why Iowa wants to go first and they're so committed to going first is they do want that perception of kind of anointing the future leader. And we can't discount the effect that media has. And if people are hearing, even African Americans are hearing that Pete Buttigieg won Iowa, that might make a few more people think like, hey, he could be a good candidate for us. I think overwhelmingly the key for all Democratic voters is I just want somebody who will get Trump out of the White House. So I think that if they hear that Pete Buttigieg might be the guy, okay, fine, I can like that guy. He's just not Trump. And so I think we will have to wait and see what the effect of this Iowa mess and then New Hampshire and Nevada has before we can really guess how African Americans in South Carolina will vote.
Sure.
I think the key question for African American voters in Buttigieg is why they haven't been favoring him. Is it a matter of name recognition and just not having familiarity with him? If so, doing well in Iowa and New Hampshire, having a momentum, showing some signs of electability should help him. If it's a matter of them not liking his record as mayor of South Bend or his message, then it's not a matter of name recognition, and he's probably not going to pick up steam with them. And I don't think we have a very good measure from polling of what exactly is more important in their resistance to him.
Kirby emails, the headline on the Washington Post homepage today is, quote, top Democrats beset by infighting, threatening chances against Trump. Is this what Democrats do best, he says, hand-wringing when only one vote has been held? Michael.
Yes. As Will Rogers said, I belong to no organized political party. I'm a Democrat. And so, this is what all parties go through. Think about 4 years ago. At this point in time, the Republican Party was in chaos because Donald Trump was leading in the polls, winning and doing things that would just upset the entire dynamics of what we lovingly refer to as the establishment within political parties. We're seeing the same thing kind of play out here in the Democratic Party. So, by some point, as both Whitney and Eric have said, Democrats are united on one thing: defeating Donald Trump. And I think by the point we get to the convention, whoever the nominee is going into the fall, that's going to be the main driver. It will play a huge role in terms of motivating, energizing, mobilizing for November. But I think this is what the party is naturally going through.
After we get beyond New Hampshire and Nevada and South Carolina, will we still be talking about Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar or Elizabeth Warren, or was Iowa, I guess the question is, was Iowa a fluke, Eric?
I'm skeptical that we'll be still talking about Amy Klobuchar. I think another poor performance by Elizabeth Warren in New Hampshire and probably in Nevada makes it very difficult for her to come back. I think the key going into the Super Tuesday states, and really that's going to be so huge. We have 16 states going simultaneously, including California and Texas.
And us.
And us. so many delegates at stake. We get the first chance to see whether Michael Bloomberg's strategy of staying out of the first 4 states and just deluging the rest of them with money is going to pay off. I think one risk for Joe Biden is not just the dynamics of not doing well, but he doesn't have much money. So playing in 6 states at once, he really has to rely on his reputation to sustain him. And if the electability argument is taking a hit by doing poorly in the first 4 states, that's going to be a big challenge for him.
You brought up the elephant in the room, Michael Bloomberg, and Carnell on Facebook writes, I haven't heard until this moment in time a mention of Michael Bloomberg. His campaign is heavily courting voters, and I believe he will make an impact. I believe he's going to siphon away voters from Biden in places like South Carolina, especially from younger voters who are lukewarm to Biden. What about that, Dr. Manzo? The effect of Michael Bloomberg delaying his campaign, not campaigning actively in these early primary states, but plowing hundreds of millions of dollars of his own money into this.
Well, I think that we definitely need to acknowledge he is the guy that most Americans saw during the Super Bowl. We had a Trump ad from Trump, and then we have an ad from one Democrat, and it's Michael Bloomberg. And then he recently also came out with a new ad this weekend, and I've seen a lot of people on Twitter and other social media saying that they are surprised at the quality of these ads. And he's saying all of the stuff that voters say they want to hear. I'm a middle-of-the-road guy who just wants to get us back to decency and help average Americans. And so I do think that Eric is right. We can't discount the Michael Bloomberg effect that all of these ads are going to play, because at the end of the day, if he's the name that most average Americans have seen by the time that they're voting, then that's the name that they'll remember going into the voting.
What does it say, Michael, about either the Democratic Party or politics in America today that we have Michael Bloomberg, who I guess could be called a Democrat, but it's a little unsure. I think he may have easily run as a Republican. Had the
He's tried all 3.
Okay.
He's got
He's been all 3, exactly.
And then you have one of the front runners in the Democratic Party who's an independent who caucuses with the Democrats. Why are they letting him run as a Democrat? What does this say about the Democratic Party or American politics today?
I think it paints a picture that we as political scientists are still trying to understand. It is very much in flux. We have a new generation, voters under the age of 40, millennials and Gen Zs, entering into the electorate and really putting their stamp, a very different kind of perspective, a center left, as opposed to the boomers who are center right. And I think the Democratic Party is, again, trying to figure out who and what they want to be. When you have a Democratic socialist like Bernie Sanders, who is basically leading in a very close competitive election, but then you have somebody like Michael Bloomberg coming in. This is all kind of, at least in my experience, kind of uncharted territory that we're just going to have to wait and see play out.
And Donald Trump in 2016 on the Republican side. I mean, it's clear that there's strong anti-establishment currents in both political parties. Not clear that people have a particular solution they're looking for, but they're looking for someone who's going to really dramatically change the way the system is working.
And when Bernie Sanders refers to himself, and he does, as a democratic socialist, that's a small d democratic socialist, correct? Not a big D.
Correct.
Does that help? Does that hurt the Democratic Party when he calls himself because people can't separate the two? All right, we have to take a break. Dr. Eric Heberling is here from UNC Charlotte, Dr. Michael Bitzer from Catawba College, and Dr. Whitney Manzo from Meredith College. We're going to talk about the State of the Union, God help us, the acquittal, and more when we come back in Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members of the Charlotte Symphony, performing Valentine's Weekend, Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 1, and Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet Fantasy Overture, February 14th through 16th at Night Theater. Tickets at charlottesymphony.org. And Jaguar Charlotte, offering over 100 vehicles, including the luxury all-electric zero-emissions I-Pace SUV. Options and availability at jaguarcharlotte.com. It's crunch time in New Hampshire for the Democratic presidential candidates. They have had a busy few weeks, and they're going to have more ahead, including this month's important South Carolina primary. And Charlotte Talks will be in Rock Hill on Wednesday night for a preview of the first in the South primary. You can join us at Winthrop University's DeGiorgio Campus Center Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock, and you can register to attend and find more information at WFAE.org. And we talk more politics coming up in just a moment. Stay with us.
It's your world. We help you explore it.
What happens to Central American migrants when the United States sends them back? A new Human Rights Watch report.
It's your community. We help you understand it.
CMS board members and staff say they'll be among only a handful of districts nationwide to create an oversight office with such sweeping powers.
WFAE's Morning Edition is an essential way to start your day and stay connected to your world. Listen weekday mornings from 5 to 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're here with three political scientists, one from UNC Charlotte, one from Catawba College, one from Meredith College. We'll let you guess which one is which. No, Dr. Eric Heberling is here from UNC Charlotte, Dr. Whitney Monzo from Meredith, and Dr. Michael Bitzer from Catawba College. Somebody wrote in that Amy Klobuchar was the only one who raised their hand in Friday's debate when asked who is worried about a socialist possibly being at the top of the Democratic Party ticket. Let's move on to the State of the Union. Dr. Monzo, this year was kind of like Bill Clinton's. It came in the middle of a presidential impeachment. This one, however, came on the eve of a Senate vote on the president's guilt or innocence. It was a foregone conclusion, I think, that the Republicans would acquit him, and in fact they did. Did that set the tone for the tension in the room that was easily transmitted on television?
Well, I think that it certainly didn't help. I think that, the Democrats and Republicans have been quite tense ever since President Trump was elected, and knowing that they were towards the end of this impeachment process and that we all knew how it was going to go, including both sides of the aisle, I think that, it was a very awkward moment for everybody to be in the same room. And then you have all of the little stuff, like several Democrats saying, "I'm not going to come," and several Republicans chanting 4 more years right at the beginning, like it's a political rally. It was an unusual State of the Union in many respects.
Yeah. On your blog, Michael, you wrote, "I have to think that there is a real possibility we have seen the last televised State of the Union before a joint session of Congress when the House of Representatives is controlled by the party opposite the White House." Really? Why?
Because we have broken so many institutional norms, so many unwritten rules of American politics, that I couldn't help but wonder as I watched it unfold last Tuesday night into the latter part of last week, that if we're going to be breaking all these norms, why not one more? And the tension, the animosity, the refusal of a handshake, the refusal of the speaker to introduce the president in the typical way, the tearing up of the speech, the chanting, as Whitney talked about, 4 more years. What the speaker can invite, the speaker can choose not to invite, and there is no constitutional prerogative or right that the president has to go before the Congress. He can, as Thomas Jefferson up to Woodrow Wilson did, just send a written statement and have that be the State of the Union. So I'm fearful that will happen. I hope it doesn't. But this is the continuing breakdown of our basic political norms that signify to me some really dangerous territory moving into.
I think the first president to address Congress with the State of the Union speech was Calvin Coolidge. I could be wrong.
I think it was Wilson before.
Okay.
It was Woodrow Wilson. Actually,
Okay.
George Washington and John Adams did it.
Okay.
But then Jefferson thought that, this is too much like the king going before Parliament, so he discontinued it, and then Wilson picked it up.
Okay. So it's a relatively modern habit to do this, and as Michael alluded to, there's a lot of animosity right now. The Speaker of the House does not have to ask the President to speak. The report can be delivered on paper. to the Congress and filed away in the congressional record, or I suppose he could make the speech in the East Room or the Oval Office and not be in front of the Congress. Why did she invite him?
Probably the risk of backlash. Trump excels at playing the victim. So the establishment barring him this opportunity, I think he could use to great effect. But I think the alternatives Trump has for communicating, whether it's Twitter or Fox News or talk radio, I don't think he needs the State of the Union.
Right.
I think he took advantage of the State of the Union to great effect, including the people in the galleries, which we've gotten used to. But with his surprises, he made that a whole lot more compelling. Yeah, all the things than we've had in the past.
All of the things that you mentioned, Michael, the snub it might not have been a snub. It looked like a snub when he didn't shake her hand. Maybe he didn't see her hand. Maybe he's not all that familiar, it seems, with tradition in America. So he may not know that it was traditional for him to shake the Speaker's hand. We have this show business, Oprah-like approach to the State of the Union where everybody gets a car in the gallery. We have the stone silence on the part of Democrats for the most part, and some of them walking out. We have her tearing up the speech at the end of the speech and calling it, after she left the House chamber, a manifesto of lies. The fact that she eliminated "I have the high privilege and distinct honor" when she introduced the president. She says, "Here's the president, here he is." Taken individually, this would have been a scandal 5, 6, 7 years ago. When you put them all together, Dr. Monzo, is this a clear indication that this republic has almost reached, or has reached, a point of no recovery?
I wouldn't go that far, but I do think that as long as Trump is in office, we can expect any Democrat if the Democrats continue to hold on to the House, then I can expect, like Michael said, that it might be dicey whether or not we have a televised State of the Union, because we know now he's just going to turn it into another reality show. And so I think that the real concern is whether or not President Trump, if he lost in 2020, which I don't want to make a guess right now about that, but if he did, I think a real concern is whether or not we could transfer power back peacefully, whether or not Trump would be willing to do that, or any of the Republicans. And I think that will be the real test that we need to worry about, rather than, while political norms are important, I think that all of these things are stuff that, we all notice because we pay attention. But the stuff that really matters, who's going to be polite when they transfer or actually leave office is the real thing.
Well, you're echoing what Bill Maher has been saying now for almost a year, that if he loses, he will not leave peacefully, and he wants to know from all of the Democratic candidates, if you win and he refuses to leave, what's your plan? Do you really believe that he wouldn't leave office, or he wouldn't participate in a peaceful transfer of power, which is one of the great things about America?
I think that, as you alluded to, President Trump doesn't always know the norms of how to behave in American politics. And so while I don't know that he would barricade himself in the White House and physically refuse to leave, I don't know that he necessarily goes quietly or peacefully. Okay. And that is something that it does concern me, just because, that is something that our republic rests on. But I also don't know, even if he wins, I don't know that the Democrats are going to take that very well either. And so I think we do need to be concerned about both sides losing some of their civility.
Well, let me ask you, I don't know which one of you to ask. If he wins, but the Democrats keep the House, and by some luck they take the Senate, are we in for impeachment 2.0 with success this time?
It still would take 2/3 of the Senate to remove the president from office, so I think the chance of that was still very low. But to continue Whitney's point, even if the president does leave peacefully, his Twitter feed is not going away. His ability to dominate the media is not going away. He's going to be the critic in chief for whoever the next president is, and has followers who he can mobilize to make life very difficult for the new president and for the Congress.
So the day after this, go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say, and remember, there's an election in 2024.
Yeah, he could come back. What will he be, 90?
We all hope there's an election in 2024.
Yes. The day after the State of the Union, the United States Senate acquitted the president on both articles of impeachment. They did so along party lines, obviously. We all remember this. I think we do. Mitt Romney was the only Republican to cross lines, and he only voted guilty on the first article, abuse of power. Democrats argued for witnesses and documents. Republicans voted not to allow them, making this the first impeachment in history not to have witnesses and documents. Democrats, even some Republicans, favored having both and agreed it's not a real trial without witnesses or documents. When we look back on this moment, Eric, I don't know, 10 years from now, 100 years from now, how will we look at this verdict in the Senate?
Oh, I think it'll be taken the same way we take it now, which is the partisan divisions mean that there was never any chance that he'd be removed from office, that it was a congressional trial, and it's supposed to be. That's what the Constitution says. But there was never any intention of paying very close attention to the evidence. So, the Republicans' point in the Senate was, well, why bother with witnesses? It's just going to delay the inevitable. So we're going to sandbag it, and we don't think that voters are going to hold us accountable for doing it. And voters have let a number of norms pass by without punishing politicians for doing it, and so I think they made a reasonable political judgment in doing so.
Some have said, Michael, that this is the final indication that the Republican Party is no longer a party but a cult. Is that hyperbole? Is that too severe an assessment?
I think with Joe Walsh's exit in challenging Donald Trump, he came to that conclusion. I think the politics of personality is the way that I would describe it, that really principles in ideology have been, for lack of a better word, trumped in the GOP. And what we have is a modern political party that is so totally tied to one individual that really it's all about whether Donald Trump likes you or not within the modern Republican Party. And I think we see that playing out with the senators, with, any candidate that wants to run. They want the blessings of Donald Trump, and they certainly do not want to invoke his rage or ire.
And Democrats said the result that the Republicans gave Mr. Trump in the Senate was going to unleash Donald Trump. It will enforce his already held belief that as president he can do whatever he wants to do with no consequences. And on Friday he did fire the two of the people who testified in the House impeachment hearings. Ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland was recalled, and Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, a decorated Iraq war veteran serving on the National Security Council, as well as his brother, also serving in the White House, also a war veteran. Both were fired and escorted from the building by armed guards. Has anything like this, Dr. Monzo, ever happened in America before?
Well, if it has, it's been a really long time. I don't want to act like partisanship is something new in American politics. There's plenty of contentious relationships, even going back to the Founding Fathers, and, the very famous battles between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. But I do think that for many years now, these kinds of political reprisals would have been seen as the point of no return. This is going to be the scandal that does it. But we keep saying that with President Trump. And so I think that Michael is right when this is just a politics of personality. It's a very different beast than we've been dealing with. And we can expect more of this if we have another President Trump for the next 4 years.
If I can stand up for the Republican Party a little bit, Trump, from their perspective, is delivering on some of the things they really do care about. Big tax cuts, big increases in defense, abortion.
Wouldn't Michael Pence?
Judges.
Abortion, judges, guns. He is off the reservation on other things like NATO and trade and budget deficits. But if you're what partisans do basically is their default is to stick with their party. They look for reasons to do that. And Trump is giving them sufficient reason to do that.
Wouldn't Mike Pence?
Sure. And I think that's one of the things that surprised me more about impeachment, that even if Trump was removed from office, it would be Pence. It would damage the party brand, and I think that was one of the key things that held them back.
Well, let me ask you about this. I mean, some people have said by voting the way they voted, they completely obliterated any oversight of the executive branch by the Congress going forward, period, end of sentence. Did they?
I absolutely agree with that, yeah. I mean, we can argue that, well, past presidents have made it difficult for presidents or for Congress to get evidence. And we can argue about where the line is that we should draw between, executive branch being forthcoming and Congress demanding things they shouldn't. But to say absolutely that I'm not having anybody testify, I'm not having any documents, there is no line whatsoever if that's your stance. And there's no ability, not just for Congress to hold the executive branch accountable. If they can withhold any information, then the American people don't have any ability to hold the executive branch accountable. You only get the information that's going to be positive to them, because that's all they're going to release.
Okay.
And I want to say that I do agree with Eric, definitely, that Trump is fulfilling many things that Republicans have wanted for a long time. But I think the problem lies in how short-sighted they're being. The students that we teach today, the conservative-leaning students, nearly universally think that the way that President Trump behaves is a problem. They don't love a lot of the social issues of the Republican Party. And so if the Republican Party, it's great, you're getting some of these judges on the courts, and they'll be there for a while, and you're getting some of these other domestic policy issue wins, but is this good for the long-term health of your party? And I just am unconvinced.
And I think things like allowing the president to change congressional spending, for his wall. Again, I agree with Whitney. Short term, that's great. Democrat, particularly like a Bernie Sanders who wants to spend money on everything, they're going to regret it.
Yeah, it would seem to me if Bernie Sanders gets elected and he wants to have Medicare for all and the Congress doesn't, he'll just do it. And what choice do they have? Am I exaggerating?
Not much.
Okay.
No.
Dr. Eric Heberlig from UNC Charlotte, Dr. Michael Bitzer, Chair of the Department of Politics at Catawba College, Dr. Whitney Ross Manzo, the Assistant Director of the Meredith Poll and an Assistant Professor of Political Science at Meredith College. We had more to talk about, but the clock rules and we are out of time. There is grace in the world yet. Thank you very much for the hour.